Good evening all and welcome. Tonight's stories are not only going to horrify you, but going to completely destroy your trust in clowns. So I hope you're ready, because it's time to follow me on Twitter and let the darkness take control. I'm a 23-year-old, somewhat physically fit male, who unfortunately has had his fair share of experiences in physical altercations through the years. I'm not that tall, maybe 5'9", weigh around 180 pounds, and while I'm not the most physically imposing guy out there, I do have a pretty broad frame. The reason I bring all of this up is because some people may think a guy may not be able to relate to many of the experiences shared, like girls being stalked or harassed. However, this isn't the case. I was scared to death this night, and I felt the need to share it with all of you. The events of this story occurred while I was approximately 16 years old and in high school. I'm now 23 and attending university to become a physical therapist. My life over the past 7 years between the time this event occurred and my life now have been chaotic, to say the least. I am a recovering drug addict, and I abused opiates and cocaine for 4 years before getting clean 21 months ago and getting my life straight. Because of this fact, I don't have the best memory of that time period. However, I will do my absolute best to recall everything to the finest detail my mind can muster. Nothing will be exaggerated, and if anything is murky, I will either let you know or omit it. But now, without further ado, let's begin. I live in the deep south and went to high school in a small to medium-sized town with roughly 30 to 50k people. Because the town is not the greatest size, there were not very many things to do on weeknights or weekends either, for that matter. This was before I got into the big partying phase. I was 16, and at that age you can choose between going to the movies, browsing the mall, going bowling, having dinner somewhere, or going to Broad Street, which is the main street in downtown that is a historical site and has a lot of shops and restaurants and stuff on it, pretty much like a main street in most towns that actually have them. In high school, going out there and just walking it, or going to see the fountain or the bridges that go over many rivers in the town behind it, were popular things to do. The bridges over the rivers were also very popular for teenagers to smoke pot or to just hang out and talk. These bridges were very dimly lit and were very barely wide enough for a car to drive over. There were no cars allowed back there anyway. This place was strictly for scenery or walking your dog or whatever. Well, one night a few of my friends and I went back there to hang out and waste a Friday night. I didn't smoke pot, and there was another friend of mine there who didn't either. His name was Zach. So while my friends started smoking, Zach and I decided to just take a walk over the hill and check out the other bridges on the other side. We probably walked a good half mile to a mile away from them, to the point where if we screamed at them, or if they screamed at us, neither would hear. Also, because we traveled over other hills, and the distance we traveled, we couldn't see our friends or anyone else for that matter. It was a cool autumn night and exceptionally dark out. I remember it being one of the darkest nights in living memory. Not especially cloudy, but there was no moon, or perhaps it was just incredibly dim. Being in the area we were in, so far from Broad Street, and our friends didn't help either. The only lights we had were the very dim ones of the bridge. Zach and I were just standing there looking at the river flow gently beneath us, getting ready to head back to the others when we saw two silhouettes growing larger and larger towards us. It wasn't uncommon for people to walk their dogs back here, even at the later hours of the night. I believe it was around 11 p.m, and it also wasn't uncommon for other people to just be doing what we were doing. After all, that's what the place was built for. So at this point we aren't particularly frightened or anything. Personally, I didn't think anything of it, and at this point we had been gone for at least half hour, and assumed they would be finished, so we started to walk back, disregarding the dark figures, which we could now see in our peripheral vision. As we walked, we heard a sharp, loud whistle, one of those that people make by putting two fingers in their mouths and blowing. I still have no idea how to do it. So we turned around and looked. It was the two other silhouettes, now submerged under the revealing light of the bridge. "Y'all come on over here for a minute now, boys." There were two middle-aged men, one slightly taller than me and the other significantly taller. They were large dudes, both with completely shaved heads, bald as could be, and I'll never forget the way their eyes looked. The only way to describe them is crazy. Methed out possibly, maybe crack. They were absolutely delusional. Both were tattooed on their faces and the rest of their body, that we could see anyway, which wasn't much because they were both wearing long black leather trench coats. The shorter of the two was holding a brown paper bag. You can tell when a brown paper bag has alcohol or some sort of bottle in it. Yet this didn't. I have no idea what was in the bag. The guys began asking us a lot of questions, very personal, scary questions, and they were both quite obviously neo-Nazis, identifiable by the shaved head and swastika tattooed on their faces. They would ask Zach and me things like, "Do you love your race, boy? Would you do anything for someone of your race? You ain't got no dirty blood in you, do you? Any poison running in your veins?" When confronted in a situation like this with two drug-induced, delusional, presumably killers interrogating you, you pretty much tell them everything that they want to hear. "Oh yes sir, very proud to be white. No sir, everyone in my family for generations has been white." I noticed Zach wasn't speaking. He was even more nervous than I was. Zach was raised by a white family, but he looked suspiciously of Native American descent. I often questioned if he was adopted. They questioned Zach more and more, but I stood there and told them that he was my brother and he was indeed white. After we had convinced them of our racial heritage, they were satisfied that we were white. I thought maybe that would be the end of it, and they would let us go. But I was wrong. This was only the beginning. For you to understand why we just didn't tell these two lumps to piss off, we have to go and then run, I should explain to you that the shorter of these two men had what appeared to be a 9mm pistol. I could be mistaken about the caliber, but it was unmistakably a pistol, hanging slightly out of the opening between his jacket pocket in the front. However, that wasn't even our main concern. With every gesture the larger man made while he spoke, he slung around a large knife in his hand, almost as if he had forgotten it was there. It was so casual. It wasn't a pocket knife. It was too large to be. It looked like one of those really large 9 to 10-inch blade knives they sell at convenience stores with dragons on the handle for $20. "We aren't from here. We're traveling soldiers for the white race," he explained. He told us they were from the state directly above mine, and they were here to purge the unclean. While the second round of conversation and questioning was going on, an elderly couple, maybe in their 50s to 60s, walked less than 40 yards away from us walking their dog. We all just stopped talking and looked at them. In my head, I'm begging them to please call the cops, and I'm giving them that rescue us look with my eye. They got past us, put their heads down and picked up the pace. It was at this point that the scariest part of my night happened. The shorter one took out his gun, casually. He made my friend Zach and I remember his phone number and remember the name of their army, stating they had a full team of snipers with their sights aimed at our heads right now, if we were unable to do so. Obviously there were no snipers on the rooftops, but don't ask me what his logical reasoning were behind this. People in drug-induced manias don't generally have the best logic nor reasoning. I know personally. The man said it a couple of times and gave me 30 seconds to memorize it. It was an out-of-state number, so a bit more difficult to naturally memorize it. and the name of their terrorist organization was something ridiculously confusing as well. Perhaps it was just the circumstances, but it was the scariest 30 seconds of my life. Remember and repeat and live. Screw up one number and potentially get shot dead on the spot. Obviously not by a team of snipers, but the very real threat was standing right in front of me. The time was up. I repeated back, praying to a God I don't believe in that it was correct. It was, and after repeating it back, they sent us on our way. We immediately took off running back to our friends who were no longer there because of the amount of time we'd been gone. We explained to them what happened and called the police. They weren't out there, and searched the place, but the two men were gone. The number they'd given me didn't exist. No one had ever heard of their group. As far as I know, nothing came of it. They perhaps were only just drifting in our town. It was the single most frightening night of my entire life, and that is saying something. So please, racist, bigoted, ugly, idiotic scumbags low in the dirt neo-Nazis, let's never meet again. This happened in 2005. I was just about to turn 20, between my first and second year of uni, and I found a summer job at a local video rent store. I miss those. It was open 8 AM to 1 AM, so whoever was working afternoon shift had to close up, and was located in a calm downtown area, only a couple of blocks away from the city center, and whenever I had to close, I always took a taxi home, so I never had a reason to worry about my safety. After the first months, I had already learned who the regulars were, and because I was friendly and chatty, I started feeling in my element soon enough. I knew who were the good clients, who were the ones who always tended to be late to return DVDs and tried to evade the fines. There was, however, one client in particular who always gave me the creeps from the first time I saw him. He was young, maybe in his early 30s, dirty blonde hair and blue eyes, and whenever he came to rent or return, he was always kind of hostile towards me, even in mundane exchanges. The sulky and rather sarcastic way he spoke to me gave me that vibe. I didn't take it personally, but let's just say he wasn't my favorite customer. So imagine my surprise when one day I come to work and my colleague tells me that one of our clients has asked about me and when I start work. She was teasing me, that he must like me, and I couldn't really think of who said client was because she didn't remember his name. When he came to ask about me, he didn't rent nor return a DVD, so she couldn't access his account. She leaves, I start my shift, and it was really busy that day, so I quickly forgot all about it. But then, in the evening, when it was less busy at around 8, guess who shows up? The Grump. At this point, I still haven't made the connection in my mind, and I groan inwardly thinking, ugh, why always on my shifts? Then instead of going through the aisles to pick a movie, he heads straight for the counter, where I am, and starts asking me questions like what my name is, where and what I study, if I have a boyfriend, and I'm trying to be polite and casual, even though he is, once again, talking to me with that hostile vibe, which didn't really make any sense to me. Then he starts going away, mid-sentence, but suddenly turns back to me and declares that he will come pick me up tonight after my shift is over, and will walk me home. I stand there completely puzzled and weirded out. Then I try to politely dismiss that offer by saying that I normally call a cab, so there is no need. But he doesn't even hear me. He stubbornly says, "Tonight I will walk you home. I will be there when the store closes." Now after he left, I felt relieved and tried to laugh it off and think nothing of it. However, the later it got, the more creeped out I started to feel. I was wondering, what if he really does come? what would I do then? So, I decided to risk closing off early. And at 11:30 p.m., I've gradually started the process of finishing the shift, when suddenly I see a few guys passing by the store on the street, and I recognize an ex-classmate of mine. I quickly run outside and shout his name. He comes back and we greet each other with a hug. We used to be friends in high school, and I tell him about the creep and that I was scared. My friend Theo says he was going with his friends for drinks, but he'll make sure to return around closing time to see me home. I exhale in relief, because I no longer have to close early, something that made me quite anxious to do as I hate breaking the rules, even though it was unlikely I would have been caught. And as I get back inside arranging DVDs in a much calmer state of mind, the clock goes on, and 12:30 comes around. I start washing the floor and thinking I might have overreacted by getting so worked up about this whole situation, and that maybe the guy was just a harmless grump who wouldn't act on what he said. Then I hear the bell jingle, indicating that someone had entered the store. I go to the counter and stop in my tracks. I see him, the guy, slowly approaching me with a determined stare. I start shaking all over. Look outside, but the streets are empty. So I try to remain calm and not give any nervousness away in case I trigger him somehow. I continue finishing my shift when he asks if I'm ready, and once again repeat that I don't need to be walked home because I have other plans. This seems to annoy him, and he asks what kind of plans, since I didn't mention anything before, and my facade slips a little when I indignantly explain that it's not any of his business, but I made those plans after he last came. So I ask him if he doesn't intend to rent to please leave and allow me to finish up and close. He doesn't even budge, just stubbornly stands there and says, "Yes, you have no plans. I will walk you home when you finish." Now at this point my treacherous chin starts to tremble a bit because I'm on the verge of tears. I feel angry, frustrated and scared. I'm looking at the clock every few minutes and contemplate my options in case Theo forgets about me and doesn't fulfill his promise to return. It was 12:58 now. I was still stalling, seriously wondering if the situation warranted a call to the police. I was anxious to call them anyway, because I didn't want to trigger the guy, but also I was afraid to be scolded for bothering the police with insignificant things. That was my young, stupid brain. That's when I hear the doorbell ding again, and we both turn to see Theo walk inside. I had never been more glad and relieved to see him, so I put down what I'm holding and run to him. He slides a protective arm around my shoulder and asks if I'm ready, then looks at the creep in that non-verbal, defiant male way of saying, "You got a problem, bro?" Now this would be a good time to mention that Theo was a tall, bulky guy who did sports, so he was not someone you wanted to mess with, in comparison to the other guy who was rather slim. The creep looks at us for a few seconds as if weighing in his options, but then resigns and leaves. But before he goes out the door, he turns to me with a vicious glare and says, "This isn't over." Theo starts for the door, and the guy quickly left. He walked me home and warned me to speak to my manager and colleagues and warn them about him. The next day I told them everything, and I had to start taking only morning shifts for a while. A few weeks later, one of my colleagues said the creepster appeared and asked about me again. Mind you, he asked when I would be working the evening shift. They told him I only do mornings, and he seemed disappointed. He then started ranting, said that I led him on and then rejected him, and my colleagues told him that she actually knows what happened, so it would be best if he leaves, and leaves me alone, unless he wants trouble with the police. That seemed to work, because since then he never returned to the video store, at least not while I was working there. I don't know what his intentions were, but boy am I glad for Theo being there at the right place at the right time. Who knows what would have happened if he hadn't have been. In the summer of 1995, I was 11, sleeping late home alone at around 11 a.m., while my parents were at work. I got woken up by the doorbell, so instinctively I hurried up down the corridor, but before I rushed to open the door as I normally would, I remembered the many times my mum scolded me for opening the door without asking who it is first, or looking through the peephole to make sure it was safe to open, especially after some previously creepy experiences having already taken place at this point. So I asked, "Who is it?" But all I heard was some unintelligible mumbles, so I thought about it and brought a chair up, stepped on it, and looked through the peephole. We lived in an apartment building, and on the right of our door was the elevator, and then the staircase. Since the staircase windows were on the far left corner, there was not enough natural light up there to help me see who it was. I just saw a male with some colourful t-shirts standing outside. I repeated the question, and then strained to hear the answer. He said he was looking for Miss Marjorie. That's my mother's maiden name, and I replied that she was at work. To give you some context, both of my parents are doctors, and I don't know if that sounds weird for the US or the rest of the Western world, but in Eastern Europe in the 90s, it wasn't uncommon for grateful patients to sometimes stop by, wanting to give them thanks by bringing fresh fruit or vegetables or produce from their gardens, especially those with which my parents had helped but couldn't pay. So the man said he was bringing something for my mum, except even in the murky light I could see his hands were empty. I asked what it was, and he said he left the package at the stairs. At this point I'm starting to get this uneasy feeling that something isn't right, so I decide to be cautious and lie to him that I don't have keys, and said my parents are at work and they've told me to not open the door for strangers, so when they come back they can help him. He starts to get agitated and said he can't wait that long, and then says he's actually bringing meat so that it would get spoiled in the heat if it's left outside. I begin to hesitate, because what if he's telling the truth? Will I get in trouble for letting the meat spoil? But then I look through the peephole again and see his hair, which means he has his ear pressed to the door and he's listening in. This spooked me, so I said that I was sorry and couldn't help him, and asked him to come back later when I wasn't alone. He once again said he wouldn't have time to come back later, so he offers to leave and says he will leave the package at the stairs. So when he's gone, I won't be afraid to open the door and retrieve it myself. I keep quiet and intently observe him as he goes down the stairs and makes noise climbing down. And then I freeze, because in the silence that ensued, I was just about to really open the door and check, when I saw his t-shirt sleeve behind the corner of the stairs. He was hiding, probably hoping that I would open the door thinking he were gone, when in fact, he was preparing to, what, pounce on me, break into our apartment? Maybe something worse. I got so scared I froze and just kept on watching, standing on the chair behind the door, and finally after what seemed like hours but was probably maybe just 10 minutes, I heard him descend the stairs. I still didn't open the door. I called my mum's hospital but she couldn't be put through, so I waited for them to come back home in the afternoon. They both got worried but proud of me that I did the right thing. A few hours later, all the kids from the building and I are at the little square playground/bench area in front of it. It was buzzing with kids running around and grandparents, so it was very safe. My best friend Nina and I were sitting on one of the benches when suddenly a strange man approaches us and stands next to the bench and asks our name. I hesitantly say what it is, although my heart starts to beat faster as I recognize the voice. It was the man from the morning. This time I'm not alone, so I instinctively press myself closer to Nina, when he says, "Well, I'm bringing something for Harry, but it's in the car and I've parked it there on the street. Will you come bring it to me?" For context, Harry is my father. Encouraged by my friend's presence and all the people around, I say to him that actually my dad is home, so if he waits there I'll go get him, and he could help him bring whatever he wants from the car, as I'm too little and can't carry heavy things. The moment I said it, the guy got quiet and then quickly began walking away. Not running, just very quickly walking. My friend, who already knew about what happened this morning, and I ran to my apartment and told my dad. He ran in his shorts to chase after the guy, but of course, he was long gone. My dad started asking away then, as once again, something typical for Eastern European countries, the grandma sitting on the balconies and the benches, looking out at everyone and everything that's going on, like a living security system. But no one has noticed anything except one grandma, an old lady living alone on the first floor, who says that a guy approached her earlier while she was sitting on her balcony and started asking about our family, then tried to ask for money to pay for the meat he was bringing. And he told her that my parents have purchased it from him. She told him she has no money, but stupidly gave him a lot of information like my name. We never heard anything about the guy, but thank God. Those questions are still puzzling me though. What did he want? Why did he say my mum's name? But then he said he was bringing something for my dad? Was he actually focused on me? Would he have abducted me? Whatever the answer, I hope to never meet him. I also remember that when school started after that summer, there was another situation that seemed weird and possibly dangerous. I was coming back from school and saw my friends gathered in front of the apartment building, but in the entrance furthest away from the one I live in. I was talking to them when I heard my mum calling me. I turned and saw she was heading to work towards the bus stop, but she never called me to go to her, and when I did, she told me she wants me to immediately go home. I grumbled but obliged. So from my point of view, what happened was this. I reached our entrance of the building and opened the door, when I feel someone coming close behind me, but I don't turn and think nothing of it. Then I start climbing the stairs quickly because I was afraid to take the elevator alone. But I hear that there are equally fast footsteps following up behind me. And just when I was fiddling with my keys about to unlock the door, I hear my mum's extremely worried voice shouting my name from downstairs, which startled me. And then the footsteps stopped right before the person reached my floor, and they started coming back down. Then my mum climbs to our floor, hugs me, and we lock the door, and she tells me what actually happened. She's going to work but sees me talking to my friends. Then she looks around and sees a creepy older man standing near us and staring at us kids. While we are all oblivious to his presence, she calls my name and tells me to immediately go home. She turns and starts for the bus stop once I head home, but then an impending sense of dread consumes her and she turns to look back, seeing that the guy is no longer where he was but actually following me, and in very few movements sees he enters the building after me and disappears. My mum begins to run in a sheer panic, reaches the entrance and shouts my name, and then she hears his footsteps back down, and then when he reaches the ground floor he passes by my mum and says he gave her such an evil, menacing glare as if he wanted to strangle her for preventing his intentions. She said alarm bells rang in her head and her whole body was full of adrenaline, ready to fight if she must, because she felt that I was in real danger. Do you think it was the same guy? I never got a chance to see him, and my mum didn't know what the guy from before looked like, so who knows? All I know is that I never want to meet either of them again. This happened back in the late 1980s, when I was home one summer on break from college. About 2 years prior, my dad had purchased an old house with the intention of eventually tearing it down to build a new home. The house was built in 1916, and like most homes built in that era, it had a really unconventional floor plan. There was a central living room and a kitchen like any normal home, but the 3 bedrooms were more akin to a separate apartment. Each had its own separate outside entrance, a private bathroom, and a door that led to the common area living room, and a kitchen. Perhaps the place was originally intended to be a boarding house or something. I really didn't know. The other thing that was a little creepy about the house was that it was all wood. The ceilings, walls, and floors were all brown, and nothing was ever painted nor plastered. My dad was a pretty cool guy. While he was waiting for permits and financing, he let 3 of my friends live there for free in exchange for watching the place. They had a lot of parties, but my dad didn't care as long as none of the neighbors complained. I went to a few parties there myself when I was lucky enough to be home from college. Eventually, 2 of my friends moved out, leaving my one buddy there to watch the mostly empty house on his own. He was not the type of person to be afraid of living alone in a half-empty house. In fact, he was fine with the situation. I'm at home one afternoon when the phone rings. It's my buddy, and he sounds terrified. He tells me to call the police and to meet him in front of the driveway of the house, but to under no conditions go in. I ask him why, and he tells me that there is a crazy clown in the house. Apparently he was sick with the man flu, in bed for the previous 2 days, when he finally felt well enough to go into the kitchen to get something to eat. He runs face to face with a crazy woman dressed in a clown suit and makeup, starts screaming at him. It was then that he ran out the house and called me in a panic from a nearby gas station. I called the police and then drove over to the house, which was about 2 miles away, and find my buddy on the sidewalk out front, and he's very shaken up. I ask him to describe what he saw, and he keeps saying that there's a crazy clown woman in the house. I press for more specific details, and he describes her as dressed in a white clown suit with red makeup smeared all over her face. He's still a little sick, and looks really bad, and honestly, he's really freaking me out as well. There's no way in hell that I was going into that house to investigate the story. After what seems like an eternity, a cop shows up. My buddy tells him the exact same story. The cop then goes into the house while we wait outside, and after about 5 minutes, he emerges escorting a crazy clown woman who looks exactly as my friend described. She has wild, unkempt brown hair, wearing this weird baggy one-piece, all-white body jumper suit that is really strangely styled. What is really disturbing though is her face. She had a tube of lipstick which she crudely spread red all over her cheeks in a failed attempt to make them look rosy. Although we were both freaked out, the cop thought it was hilarious. The clown woman claimed it was her house and then accused us of being on drugs and trespassing on her property. When the cop told her to get in the back of the squad car, she warned him that she had powerful friends in Tinseltown who would have him fired. When he comes back to talk to us, he tells us he can't arrest her for breaking and entering because the house is half abandoned. He said the best he could do was drive her a few blocks away and hope she didn't wander back. This, of course, freaks us out even more. Fortunately though, when they did a background check on her, it turns out she has an outstanding warrant and would be going to jail instead. That is the last time we saw her. When we go back into the house, we find all kinds of crazy stuff written on the kitchen cabinets in the same red lipstick that she rubbed all over her face. There was also some 10-day-old fish in the fridge that my friend never got around to eating that she cooked on the stove and ate. The really scary thing though was this crazy woman was in the same house with my friend for at least a day, while he was sick and semi-delirious in bed with a fever. She was probably harmless, but who knows what she could have done if she stumbled upon him while he was sleeping. His door was unlocked the entire time. Fortunately, she never did, as far as we know. One of the things she wrote on the cabinets in lipstick was her name. While I'm not allowed to disclose what it is, I googled it and found a mugshot that was taken of her some years later. So, creepy clown lady, let's not meet again. I was 10 at the time and was visiting my hometown, Ecuador, for the summer. At the time, I knew just about everyone in my small town. lousy. And so did my parents, which is why they let me go out on my own that day. Back to when I was 10 years old, my family decided to take a visit of my hometown in Ecuador. We went for the summer and planned out about our whole stay. One day my mum and dad were getting ready to go to a wedding when I was in the house with them. My big sister went over to a friend's house and my other relatives had already left for the wedding. I was supposed to stay home alone during the duration of the wedding, but I saw that it was a beautiful day outside and asked my mum and dad if I could go to the park, as it was no more than 2 blocks away. They were reluctant at first, stating that there would be nobody to take care of me, but I argued that it was a beautiful day out and there was no way that the park would be empty. They kept getting dressed as I argued until they finally gave in. They said that I could go to the park, as long as I was back before it got dark. I agreed and ran outside to head for the park. It took me no more than 10 minutes to get there and I was ready to make new friends and play around, but oddly enough there was no one there. It looked abandoned, which was weird seeing how this was one of the 2 parks in the whole city. It should have been packed, but I paid it no mind. I believe I ran over to a swing set or slide and played around. As I played, I suddenly heard a voice from the distance. A clown was on the other side of a gate and motioning me to get closer. Behind him was a white van, which I had noticed before, but just thought it was a delivery truck of sorts. I slowly started walking towards the clown and stopped a good distance away from him. He asked me in Spanish, "Hey kid, do you like clowns?" I nodded no to him, and he gave me that clown frown, and then said, "Well then, let me see if I can change that." He opened up his car, and by looking inside I saw that there were only 2 boxes, though I wasn't sure what they were filled with, and that was it. No seats, no posters, just those 2 boxes and then complete emptiness. Being a child, I still paid no mind to it, and watched as he pulled out a deflated balloon. He wrapped his lips around the end of it and blew till the balloon was fully inflated. He tied the end and started to form a balloon into the shape of a dog. He showed it to me and I smiled. He then motioned for me to come closer, to which I complied and handed the balloon to me and said, "Do you like it?" I nodded yes this time and gave him a small smile, and he then grinned in the creepiest way possible. The grin was so creepy that even as a kid, I knew to back away a bit. The clown then said that if I wanted to see the rest of his tricks, I would have to get into the truck. I told him the exit was on the other side of the park, and I wouldn't be able to climb the small gate. He then said a few words that still haunt me to this day. "Get a little closer, and I'll carry you over. Then we can have loads of fun in my truck. Come on, kid." While saying all of this, he still had that creepy grin plastered across his face. I merely backed away and told him, "No, it's okay, sir." His grin turned into anger, as though he were annoyed by this. He placed his hands on his hips and said, "Oh, but we're having so much fun." Right when he said that, I heard a voice on the other side of the park yelling, Son, I'm here to pick you up." I turned and saw a man that I recognized as a local neighbor. He was not my real father, obviously, but the little me knew to run over to him. I said nothing to the clown and just ran to the man and gave him a hug. The man waved to the clown and said, "Thanks for keeping my kid entertained," to which the clown replied, "No problem." As we turned around, I was able to hear this man murmur, "Sick creep." I looked at him and asked, "What exactly is going on?" He gave me a sigh and explained everything. As it turns out, he was not a real clown. He was a man that had been kidnapping kids all across Ecuador. He would lure children with the clown costume and take them away to God knows where. The people of my town had a feeling he was coming to our town, which is why the whole park was deserted. He said that he was walking by when he noticed that I was talking to the clown and ran over to save me. As he told me this, he also dialed for the police to report the incident. We had finally arrived at my house and the man said, "Be careful who you talk to, son. Not everyone is who they seem." I gave him one final hug, gave him a thanks for saving me, and he gave me a rub on the head and said, "It's okay, boy. Now hurry in. I have my own things to worry about." I nodded and ran into the house. No one was there, and by the time they had returned, I decided not to tell anyone since I knew they'd flip out. It took a while to forget about the whole incident, especially with those words that kept reminding me of him. But I soon forgot, till I came across this page, and memories of that clown flooded my head. I'm not quite sure what happened to the sicko, but hopefully he is now behind bars. So, to that creepy clown from long ago, let's not meet again. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. And if you didn't like clowns before, I'm sure you certainly don't after hearing these. A huge thanks to my incredible members and patrons for their continued support and dedication to this channel. If you would like to join and get some exclusive benefits for doing said joining, you can do so, and I would be super grateful. It costs about the price of a cup of coffee every month, and you support me directly, and it really means a lot. Obviously, or I wouldn't be asking. And your name goes on the end of the video, which is a pretty cool thing that can happen. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. I tried to pick out some really good ones because I feel like Let's Not Meet can be a bit hit and miss sometimes. Specifically went for older stories because I think, some of the original older posts just have a bit more gravity in their situations than some recent ones. But anyway, guys, I'm going to leave it here for now. So stay awesome, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.